Jesus used two words that almost got him killed every time he said them. Not because they were politically dangerous, not because they were morally offensive, because everyone in the room knew exactly what those two words meant, and what they meant was the most explosive claim any human being could make inside first-century Judaism. The words were eimi in Greek, I am. And the story of why those two words carried that weight and what Jesus was claiming each of the 7 times he attached them to a predicate in the Gospel of John begins at a burning bush in the Sinai desert and arrives at an upper room in Jerusalem with the entire history of a people carried in between. The claim does not begin with Jesus, it begins with Moses, Exodus 3. Moses is 80 years old, tending sheep in the wilderness of Midian, 40 years after he fled Egypt as a wanted man. He sees a bush burning but not being consumed, and he turns aside to look more carefully at it. A voice speaks from the fire. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. The voice identifies itself. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hides his face because he is afraid to look at God. Then comes the mission. God tells Moses to return to Egypt and bring the Israelites out. Moses asks the question that anyone in his position would ask. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? What shall I tell them? Moses is not asking out of ignorance. He knows God has names. He is asking for the name that will be authoritative in this moment, the name that will carry the weight of the mission. The name that Israel and Egypt will recognize as legitimate and sufficient. And God answers in a way that is unlike anything else in the ancient world. God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher Ehyeh, I am who I am, or I will be what I will be, or I am the one who is. The Hebrew verb Ehyeh, meaning to be or to exist, conjugated in its first-person form. God's self-identification is not a title. It is not a description of his attributes or a list of his deeds. It is a statement about the nature of being itself. I am the one who exists. I am existence itself. I am the self-sufficient, self-existent, uncaused cause of everything else that exists. Tell them Ehyeh sent you. I am sent you. And then God continues, this is my name forever, and this is how I am to be remembered throughout all generations. The covenant name that follows, YHWH, the 4 Hebrew letters that appear over 6,000 times in the Old Testament, is built from the same Hebrew root. He is, or perhaps he causes to be. The most sacred name in all of Judaism is not a proper noun chosen arbitrarily. It is a statement about the metaphysical nature of the one who bears it. He is the one whose existence is necessary rather than contingent. Everything else exists because he caused it to exist. He exists because he is. By the time Jesus is walking through Galilee and Judea in the 1st century, this name and this identity have accumulated more than 1,000 years of theological weight. Scribes copied the name with fresh pens and washed their hands after writing it. Readers of the Torah said Adonai, my Lord, rather than pronounce it. Every synagogue reading, every prayer that invoked the name of the Lord was touching this identity. I am, he who is, the self-existent one, the one whose being depends on nothing outside itself. When Jesus constructs sentences in the first person with the Greek words ego eimi, his audience hears it, always, even before they fully process the content of what follows. And when he uses the bare form without any predicate, ego eimi alone, without I am the bread or I am the light, they hear it most clearly. In John 8:58, when the Pharisees ask how he can have seen Abraham when he is not yet 50 years old, Jesus answers, before Abraham was, I am, not I was. The present tense applied to a claim about existence before a man who lived 2,000 years earlier. The crowd picks up stones. This is not an overreaction by people who have misunderstood what he said. It is the response of people who understood exactly what he said and considered it the most severe blasphemy a human being could commit. In John 18:6, when the soldiers come to arrest Jesus in the garden and he says, ego eimi, they draw back and fall to the ground. 2 words. The soldiers fall down because they knew what those 2 words claimed. The Gospel of John is structured around 7 extended I am statements with predicates, and each one is doing something more specific than a bare claim to divine identity. Each one connects to a particular moment or failure in Israel's story, and each one claims to be the fulfillment of what that moment was pointing toward. Together they form a complete argument about who Jesus is and what the entire biblical narrative was always building toward. John 6 gives us the first extended I am statement, and the setting is deliberate. The day before, Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The crowd has followed him across the lake the next morning. Jesus knows exactly why they have come. You are seeking me not because you saw signs, he says, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. Then they ask the question that opens the door. What sign will you do so that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Our fathers ate manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. The reference is to Exodus 16. Every morning in the wilderness, the ground around the Israelite camp was covered with a fine flake-like substance the people called manna, a word meaning essentially, what is it? It appeared daily. It could not be stored overnight without spoiling. It tasted like honey wafers. It sustained an entire nation through 40 years of desert wandering. It came from above. It depended entirely on God for its appearance each morning. It was, in every structural way, a picture of what total dependence on the provision of God looks like when it is made physical and daily and unavoidable. Jesus corrects the framing of their reference. It was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, he says. My Father gives you the true bread from heaven, for the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. And then, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. The manna sustained bodies for 40 years, and then the generation that ate it died in the wilderness. Jesus is claiming to be the substance that the manna was pointing toward. Not bread like the manna, temporary and external. The true bread from heaven, the original of which the manna was a copy sent ahead to establish the expectation. He is also connecting to a wisdom tradition in the Hebrew Scriptures, where wisdom itself is described as bread and water and nourishment for the deepest hunger of a human being. Proverbs 9 depicts wisdom calling from the heights of the city. Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Jesus is claiming to be not just physical sustenance, but the wisdom of God himself, available to anyone who comes and eats. The manna sustained bodies in the wilderness. He is claiming to sustain the whole person in a way the manna could never do. John 8 gives us the second extended I am statement, and John has arranged the context with precision. The Feast of Tabernacles has just concluded in Jerusalem. During that feast, 4 enormous golden menorahs were lit each night in the court of women in the temple precinct. The Mishnah records that their light illuminated the entire city of Jerusalem, that there was not a courtyard in Jerusalem that did not reflect their glow. These lamps were a deliberate remembrance of the pillar of fire that had guided Israel through the wilderness at night, the visible presence of God as a light in the dark that the people could follow. And the morning after this festival of light concludes, Jesus stands in the temple and says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. He is standing in the space where the great lamps burned the night before. The memory of those lamps is still present in everyone who can see the spent wicks and the empty vessels. And he is claiming to be what those lamps were imitating. Not a light that illuminates a courtyard, the light of the world. Isaiah 9:2 had promised the people walking in darkness would see a great light. Isaiah 42 had described the servant of God as a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind. The imagery of divine light guiding and restoring a people in darkness was one of the most consistent threads in the entire Hebrew prophetic tradition. Every menorah in every synagogue was lit as a reminder of that light. Jesus is claiming to be the original. Immediately after this statement, John records that Jesus heals a man who has been blind from birth, not a man who lost his sight, a man who was born without it, who has never seen anything. Jesus heals him completely. The sign follows the statement. The one who says he is the light of the world demonstrates what light does when it arrives where there was no light before. The blind man sees. The sign is not separate from the statement. The sign is the statement made physically visible in the world for anyone watching. John 10 contains 2 I am statements in close sequence. both drawing on imagery that anyone who had watched shepherds work in the Judean hills would have recognized immediately. In the ancient world, sheepfolds were often rough stone enclosures with a single narrow opening. At night, when predators were active and the flock was most vulnerable, the shepherd would lie down in that opening, his own body across the gap. Anything that wanted to reach the sheep had to pass through him. He was not merely someone who guarded the door from outside, he was the door in the most physical and immediate sense. No way in except through him, no way out except through him. I am the door of the sheep, Jesus says. All who came before me, who claim to offer another kind of access, are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The claim is architectural. The way into safety, the way into the sheepfold of God's presence, is not a method or a system or a ceremony or a set of practices. It is a person positioned as the door, available to anyone who approaches through that opening. Then, immediately, the second statement, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. To the first-century Jewish listener, those words activate Ezekiel 34 immediately. God had spoken through Ezekiel with unusual force and directness. You eat the fat, he said to the leaders of Israel. You clothe yourselves with the wool. You slaughter the fatlings, but you do not feed the flock. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought. And with force and harshness you have ruled them so that they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And then came the promise, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. As a shepherd seeks out his flock when he is among his sheep that have been scattered, so will I seek out my sheep, and I will rescue them from all places where they have been scattered on a day of clouds and thick darkness. When Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, he is not inventing a pastoral metaphor to describe his gentleness. He is claiming to be the fulfillment of Ezekiel 34. God said he would come and shepherd his people himself because the appointed shepherds had failed beyond recovery. Jesus is saying, that is what is happening now, in my presence, in my ministry, in the way I am searching for the lost and binding up the injured and bringing back the strayed. I am the good shepherd that God promised he himself would be. Quick word before we continue. If this study is giving you a new way of reading the Gospel of John, subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this series. Every week we cover a word, a pattern, or a claim that most people have heard but nobody has fully unpacked. If you are already subscribed, thank you. It means more than you know. Now back to the remaining statements, because the last three carry the most weight. John 11 gives us the I am statement that arrives in the worst possible circumstances. Lazarus has died. He has been in the tomb 4 days. In first-century Jewish understanding, 4 days was significant. The rabbis taught that the soul might remain near the body for 3 days, hoping to return, but that by the 4th day, when visible decomposition had begun, the death was absolutely final. 4 days in the tomb meant no one present was holding out any hope. The situation is settled. Martha comes out to meet Jesus before he reaches the village, and she tells him what she believes honestly and without pretense. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then she adds, what faith she has. Even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. Martha answers with correct Jewish theology of the Pharisaic tradition. I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. She believes in resurrection. She believes in the power of Jesus before God. She just understands the resurrection as a distant future event at the end of history, not as something relevant to the next hour. And then Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? He is not saying he can perform a resurrection for her today as a special favor. He is saying the resurrection is not primarily an event on the timeline of history that he has special access to. He is the resurrection. What Martha was thinking of as a future event at the end of history is standing in front of her in a person. He is the power behind it. He is the substance of it. He is what resurrection actually is when it is fully realized. He goes to the tomb. He is deeply moved. He weeps. He commands the stone to be removed over the objections of Martha, who knows what 4 days means. He calls Lazarus by name, and Lazarus comes out, still wrapped in the burial cloths, blinking in the light, alive in a way that 4 days in a Judean tomb should have made impossible. The sign follows the statement. The one who says he is the resurrection and the life demonstrates what that means in the case of a specific man who has been dead 4 days and whose decomposition his own sister anticipated. John 14 gives us the statement most quoted in the modern church, and it is almost always quoted without its context. Jesus is at the Last Supper. He has told the disciples that he is going away somewhere they cannot follow. He has told them that where he is going, they know the way. Thomas, genuinely confused and genuinely honest about it, speaks up. "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus says, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." 3 claims joined in one sentence: hodos, the way; aletheia, the truth; zoe, the life. Each word is doing something specific that the English translation does not fully convey. In Jewish usage, the way often referred to the path of Torah, the instructions for how the people of God were to live before God's face. The way was the path. Jesus is claiming to be the path itself, not the teacher who shows the path. You do not follow his teachings the way you follow a map. You follow him the way you follow a guide on a road you have never traveled. Aletheia in Greek means reality as opposed to illusion, what is actually true as opposed to what appears to be true. But the Hebrew concept underneath this word is emet, covenant faithfulness, the reliability of someone whose word holds, whose character does not shift, who can be trusted to be what they say they are when no one is watching. Jesus is claiming to be this kind of truth, not a collection of correct propositions, the faithful, reliable, unchanging reality that all other truth points toward, the one in whom there is no inconsistency between appearance and substance. And Zoe is the word for divine life, the life as God has it and shares it, the kind of life that participates in the nature of God rather than simply persisting biologically. The Greek New Testament distinguishes between bios, the biological existence you were born with and will eventually lose, and Zoe, the life that is shared from God's own being and cannot be ended by death. Jesus is claiming to be the source of Zoe, not a pathway to life as though life were somewhere else and he could show you how to reach it, life itself, present in a person, available to anyone who comes to him. John 15 gives us the 7th and final I am statement, and it completes the argument. "I am the true vine," Jesus says, "and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." Israel was called God's vine throughout the Hebrew prophets, and the vine consistently represented the relationship between God and his people and the expectation of fruitfulness that relationship was supposed to produce. Isaiah 5 described God planting a vineyard with extraordinary care, expecting it to produce good grapes and finding instead wild grapes, bitter and useless. The entire chapter is God's lament over a vine that has failed to do the one thing it existed to do. Psalm 80 called Israel the vine God brought out of Egypt and planted in the promised land. Ezekiel 15 asked what the vine was good for if it did not produce what it was planted to produce. The vine of Israel, across the prophetic tradition, was a vine that disappointed. Jesus says, "I am the true vine." The word true, alethinos in Greek, means the genuine original, the real thing, as opposed to a copy or a shadow. The vines of the Old Testament were real. They were given by God. They were cultivated by God. But they were pointing towards something beyond themselves, anticipating a vine that would actually produce the fruit of the kingdom in a way Israel had consistently failed to do. Jesus is claiming to be that vine, the original of which Israel's calling was a shadow. And the disciples, connected to him organically the way branches grow from a root system, connected not contractually but biologically, draw their life and capacity for fruitfulness from the same source. Now look at all 7 together, and the pattern is impossible to miss. I am the bread of life. Israel had manna, and it sustained them temporarily, but the generation that ate it died. I am the light of the world. Israel had the temple menorah, a lamp that illuminated a courtyard, a symbol of what light would eventually mean. I am the door. Israel had a sacrificial system, an access structure pointing toward presence. I am the good shepherd. Israel had appointed leaders who failed to do what the shepherd was supposed to do. I am the resurrection and the life. Israel had a doctrine of future resurrection at the end of history that could not help them today. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Israel had Torah, a path, a direction, a map, but not the one who is the path itself. I am the true vine. Israel was called to bear fruit, and the prophets documented the failure across centuries. Each I am statement responds to a specific place where something in Israel's story was incomplete, where a real gift from God was pointing beyond itself toward something greater. And each one claims to be not a replacement for what came before, but the fulfillment of it. The manna was real bread. It was pointing at the true bread. The menorah was real light. It was pointing at the true light. The shepherd metaphor in Ezekiel was pointing at the true shepherd. Every image the Old Testament used for the relationship between God and his people, Jesus is claiming to be the substance of which those images were the shadow. And every time he constructs these statements with eimi, the Greek-speaking listener hears underneath the words the echo of the burning bush. The one who identified himself as I am to Moses in the wilderness is now identifying himself as I am the bread and the light and the door and the shepherd and the resurrection and the way and the vine to fishermen and tax collectors and teachers of the law in first-century Palestine. The same name, the same claim. 7 statements that make the same argument from 7 different angles. The crowd that picked up stones in John 8 understood him correctly. What Jesus said was either the most catastrophic blasphemy a human being could commit, or it was the most important true statement ever spoken. There was no middle position available. The resurrection in John 20 is the verification. The one who said, I am the resurrection, demonstrated it by being the first to pass through death in a way that death could not hold or reverse. The 7 statements and the empty tomb are not 2 separate arguments. They are one argument made in 2 registers. This is who I am. And here is what that means for everyone who has ever been hungry or walking in darkness or lost without a shepherd or dead. Subscribe if this changed how you read the Gospel of John. Leave a comment with which of the 7 statements carries the most weight for you and why. Share this with someone who has heard these words their whole life but has never understood what was underneath them. God bless you. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament that most first-century Jews read rather than the Hebrew original, uses the specific phrase eimi in Exodus 3:14 to translate the divine self-identification. God says in the Greek, eimi on, I am the one who is, and in the verse that follows, eimi Kyrios, I am the Lord. The Greek readers of the Jewish scriptures would have encountered eimi as the sacred name every time they read the Exodus passage. When Jesus then uses eimi in the Gospel of John as his structural form of self-identification, the choice of words is not accidental, and the audience would not have heard it as accidental. Isaiah 43 shows how deeply the eimi construction was embedded in the divine self-identification across the Hebrew scriptures. God says through Isaiah, in the Septuagint, eimi I am, before me there was no God formed, and after me there will be none. The double eimi in Isaiah 43:10 and 43:11 functions as an emphatic divine self-declaration. There is only one who can say this. And in John 8:24, Jesus says, if you do not believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. The Greek is eimi, not I am he with a predicate supplied, just eimi with no object, the same construction Isaiah's God uses. The Pharisees pick up stones shortly after. They understood the reference. The internal logic of the 7 statements together reveals a Christology built entirely from the Hebrew scriptures. Jesus is not importing new concepts. He is claiming to be the fulfillment of concepts already present, already anticipated, already embedded in the story of Israel. The manna, the temple lamp, the sheepfold, the good shepherd of Ezekiel 34, the resurrection hope of the Pharisees, the path of Torah, the vine of Isaiah and the Psalms. All of these were gifts from God to Israel that were pointing beyond themselves, pointing toward the one who was the original substance of which they were the shadow. There is a statement in John's prologue that frames all the Nath and Eim declarations before they arrive. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And then in verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. The word that John uses for dwelt is eskenosin, from the Greek word skein, tent. He tabernacled among us. He pitched his tent in the camp. The same way the tabernacle in the wilderness was God's tent in the camp of Israel, pitched among the people so that his presence was not distant but adjacent. Jesus is described as God's presence pitched among humanity, full of grace and truth. Grace translating the concept of hesed, truth translating the concept of emet, the covenant love and the covenant faithfulness that are the character of the God who declared his name to Moses on Sinai. All 7 I am statements are, from this angle, extensions of the prologue. The bread, the light, the door, the shepherd, the resurrection, the way, the vine. All of them are specifications of what it means for the Word to have become flesh and tabernacled among us. The one who was in the beginning with God, through whom all things were made, is now in the flesh, saying, I am the bread, meaning the manna was a picture of me. I am the light, meaning the menorah was pointing at me. I am the good shepherd, meaning Ezekiel's promise was about me. I am the resurrection, meaning the hope of Israel was not about an abstract event at the end of history, but about a person standing in front of you. The resurrection of Jesus is the verification of all doctrine claims simultaneously. If Jesus remained in the tomb, the 7 statements are blasphemy. If he came out of the tomb alive in a way that death could not reverse, the 7 statements are the most important descriptions of a person ever spoken. And the claim of resurrection is not based on a feeling or a vision or a theological argument. It is based on an empty tomb, on women who went expecting to find a body and found the stone rolled away, on disciples who encountered a person they had watched die who was now eating fish on a shore and inviting them to breakfast, on 500 people whom Paul names as witnesses who can be questioned directly. The one who said, I am the bread of life, demonstrated it by being the first person in human history to eat after his own resurrection. The one who said, I am the resurrection and the life, demonstrated it by being the first human being to pass through death in a way that death could not hold. The one who said, I am the good shepherd, demonstrated it by being willing to lay down his life for the sheep and by taking it up again, just as he said he would. The 7 statements and the resurrection are not 2 separate theological claims. They are one argument made in 2 registers. Subscribe if this changed how you read the Gospel of John. Leave a comment with which of the 7 I am statements carries the most weight for you and why. Share this with someone who has heard these words their whole life but has never understood what was underneath them. God bless you.